The following program contains graphic material, including offensive language. Viewer discretion is advised.
Why don't we go ahead, Kenny? Go into your major topic of discussion, because I'm sure this is going to be the longest topic of tonight.
Yeah, that's possible. It's a super intriguing topic. I want to discuss the former massive failure that was Hard Rock / Freestyle Park, depending on which of the 2 years it was open.
Free air guitars.
Free air guitars. Did you listen to that episode I sent over in the group chat?
I haven't had a chance. Been very busy trying to get with my trip and everything.
I'll give a quick plug to the Season Pass podcast, because as fascinating as the story of this park is, they did a great episode back a couple of years ago, and it's actually, I went and looked to make it easier to find. It's episode 243. It was about 3 years ago. If you want to look back in the archives and listen in, they had John Binkowski of
what
Renaissance.
Podcast is this?
The Season Pass podcast. Doug Barnes and them do great work over there. Very solid podcast. But John Binkowski of Renaissance Entertainment was the guy who he sort of headed up this project as far as like the creative, all of the creative shit went. He was the CCO of the park. But so this story, it started in a super interesting time where it was kind of post September 11th, 2001. Obviously, we all know what happened there. But he had a property in Myrtle Beach that was kind of flailing around and not doing super well, and he decided to pool together a bunch of investors to build this $400 million theme park from the ground up, which is super risky in itself. But definitely, I guess, in Myrtle Beach, apparently a little bit more risky even. But so they set out to build this massive park, and they eventually tacked on Hard Rock as the title sponsor, if you will, to kind of brand the park and give kind of an overarching theme to everything. And they built this amazingly immersive park full of, roller coasters and these awesome thrill rides, and some of them very cutting edge, actually, which we can get into here in a bit. But basically, there's a lot of opinions out there and reasons, and Drew, you'll be able to maybe shed a little more light on this because you have a lot of knowledge about this as well. But there's a lot of different varying opinions as to why this park failed. But really, it opened in 2008. The economy took a shit, and because this park was so heavily leveraged as far as the financing to open it, nobody really had the money up front to open it. It was all financed. When everything else crashed, it kind of crashed as well. And it was, it went through a change of ownership, and they attempted to reopen it in 2009 under the name Freestyle Park, and they had to drop a lot of the licensing of the bands that they had, because they had tapped a bunch of big time bands. I mean, they had Led Zeppelin involved. They had the Eagles were involved. All these various rides in the park had major bands tied to them. And in some cases, the rides were built specifically around a song. Listening to that Season Pass podcast episode, it was amazing to listen to John talk about the creative process of working with not only Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, but B&M to kind of build that Led Zeppelin roller coaster around the song Whole Lotta Love. Like, they literally built certain parts of the ride to time this ride out to go with the song. And that wasn't the only case. I mean, they worked on, different songs with different bands where maybe they'd record a different version of a song just to fit the ride. Just super interesting stuff. And they had this one roller coaster built by Premier Rides called, I can't think of the
Maximum RPI.
No.
No, that might have been its new name.
The one with the fucking Ferris wheel lift.
Yeah.
Well, that thing was, dude, you guys need to...
No, he's right. It's maximum RPM.
Was it maximum
I remember
RPM?
that because that's got the wheel lift hill.
Okay.
And that one used Gary Newman for the song. Yeah.
There you go. So they had not only some traditional style rides with music that was maybe customized for the ride, but they had, cutting edge rides that was shit that you had not seen before. They had what's kind of regarded as one of the greatest dark rides ever created by Sally with the what the hell's the name of that?
Knights in White
Satin. The Trip, actually.
Yeah, the Trip.
Which the merchandise was actually like mushrooms at the end of the ride, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, the whole ride essentially was if you took the drug-inspired portions out of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or
it's just
the
that
Wizard of Oz.
Boat ride.
It's like a terrifying fucking drug-induced trip through this ride where all the lighting effects and just different various physical props and shit like that was just, you basically were on a crazy trip through this ride, and it was all in 3D.
And take their kids there.
Well, to listen to John talk about it, it was one of those things where it turned out to be wildly popular, and they didn't expect this because for the adults, it was kind of a trip down memory lane of their youth when they were doing drugs. But for the kids, it was this amazing thing at the time when you didn't have a lot of like these sort of 3D attractions like that out there where the kids would just go through and they were just blown away by the visual effects of it. So it kind of hit on all fronts for the families. It was a weird thing where maybe the lesson to take from it maybe wasn't the greatest, but let's face it, you were at Hard Rock Park. The entire atmosphere of the park is the rock and roll lifestyle. So it's kind of, you're not really hiding anything. You know what I mean?
Kids to smoke a lot of drugs and have sex with your teenage friends.
Exactly.
I'm actually a big fan of the Motley Crue experience where you pass around a needle and you just see which one of you and your friends die. Defibrillator on
Which
call.
with Pamela Anderson.
So for me, on a personal level, this will always be the park that I don't care what parks are out there now that I haven't been to or I may not get to. For me, being as big of, and I talked about this on last week's episode with Rip Ride Rocket, I am such a fan of music in general that this, and I also, this is why I love Hard Rock Cafe and Hard Rock Hotel. Like, that speaks to my lifestyle. Like, I am just into that music themed anything. And for me, this is always going to be that park that I really, really, really wish like hell I could have experienced. And I'm not going to be able to, but it's a fascinating fucking story to see how this massively themed and it was a large part. Like, we're not talking about something that was just like, oh, let's start small and see what comes of it. $400 million on, I think it was 140 acres. This was a genuinely full-size theme park that was, they had lofty goals and they failed fucking miserably, but it's not necessarily because it was done wrong. It was done for whatever various reasons, whether it be the economy at the time or maybe bad marketing research and it was in a bad area. I'm not sure, but
I'm going, interestingly, I'll relate it to two other things that we talked about, one of them being Dollywood and the other being what I was saying about environmental, I'm going to keep fucking this up, environmental determinism. I wonder if it would have been more successful had they placed it someplace that had a lot, like an airport that was cheaper to fly to. Like, one of my issues with going to, say, Dollywood, like, I love that area. I try to go, I missed it last year, but I usually go whitewater rafting every year over at Chattanooga, and then we'll go up to, like, Pigeon Forge and stay in a cabin. But my issue with it is that if I'm driving by myself, it's expensive. And if I fly, I basically either have to fly to Atlanta or to Nashville, rent a car, and drive for roughly 3 hours. And I look at Myrtle Beach, because that's where it was, correct?
Yes.
As far as I know, there's no fairly near major airport near to Myrtle Beach, which means that, and there's no like interstate that goes straight there because of where it is in relation to the country, which means that people have to travel there pretty much by car for the most part. So I wonder if that doesn't play a factor in a project as ambitious as this one as far as its success. I wonder. I don't have any numbers on that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's something that I again I said this earlier. Drew, maybe you have more insight on this, but I always kind of wondered if it was just strictly came down to a lack of research prior to opening this. Like there's obviously a reason that prior to that, and even since then, the park has been standing there, shut down and basically run into the ground just by being left empty. But nobody has jumped on the Six Flags or the Cedar Fairs. Nobody jumped in on doing that, and those are major established companies that maybe do that kind of marketing research before jumping into an endeavor like that. And I just happen to think, like, had this been put somewhere else, like the idea of it, I could definitely see being successful. And this guy touched on that. Like, this was an idea that was supposed to branch out once it was established, and maybe open one of these in Tokyo or open one of these in LA. It's an idea that with the right brand, which I felt like Hard Rock is definitely a brand that could be carried on a overlaid over a theme park. It failed, and I can't help but think if it just was in the wrong area. I don't know. Also, it was interesting to hear him say, like, there were billboards up in the Myrtle Beach area, and families were kind of confused. Like, well, is it Hard Rock? Like, is this like the cafe in a theme park? Like, what is this? Is that theme park?
Casino? What's
right?
Yeah.
Like, they recognized the Hard Rock name, but didn't know what to do with it being a theme park.
I definitely think I'm not sure if it's the location, because you think with Myrtle Beach and everything, you do have, that's a fine regional location that hasn't really been developed, because you really don't want to put it near everything else where it's going to get swallowed up. You don't want to put it in a place like Orlando. So I'm not sure if the location is. I just wonder if maybe just the advertising was super poor. We talk at length on certain episodes of UUOP about how Universal kind of botched everything with the Universal Escape advertisement. And for a major theme park to have major issues like that due to advertising, I can see it really killing off a smaller regional park like this. Drew, you probably have a little bit more to say about that.
So, one of my professors at the University of Central Florida was actually the general manager of Hard Rock Park and was the last employed employee of that company before it got taken over by the next company of Freestyle Music Park. So I always had plenty of chats with him about why this park failed and things. So I have some interesting stories that I don't necessarily know because I haven't listened to the Season Pass podcast, but some things that they thought that they did that were incorrect. One of them was Myrtle Beach, while it gets about 14 million visitors a year, which is a fuck ton of visitors for a tourism destination, it is like it's essentially the fun spot of America, meaning that people who go to Myrtle Beach are literally going there to spend as little money as possible, and their vacation is the fucking beach. So nobody going there has money. They're not looking to go out to the fancy restaurants or anything like that. Their literally whole plan of going out there is to go on vacation and to just hang out at the beach. So some data that I was
budget vacation.
Yeah, so some data that I was pulling up while we were talking, which is why I was kind of like focused on my computer. So their average room rate for a hotel in the year that Hard Rock Park just opened was $89 a night. So that should go to show you, like, your hotel is not really that expensive. You have Orlando hotels that are way more expensive than that. So that's pretty much on your budget end of hotels at this point. That's your Motel 6 price and all that kind of thing. And that's your average room for an entire city. So that's pretty low. So once again, you're talking budgets there. And your admission price to your park is $65 in a year of a recession where Cedar Point was in the 40s. Like, so it wasn't priced correctly. Another thing that they did wrong was their hours really didn't line up with the Myrtle Beach clientele. Most people are there to go to the beach, and that's when your goddamn park was open. It was open during the time where people would be at the beach, sunbathing and all of that kind of thing. So had they shifted their hours a little bit and made it more of like an evening to nighttime destination, I think they probably could have succeeded there as well. I know that my professor was talking about their advertisement budget was nothing. They built it and they were like, all right, people are going to come because it's Hard Rock Park. And they never spent the time like working with Myrtle Beach Tourism Bureau and stuff like that, sort of like how the theme parks all work with Visit Orlando. They didn't do any of that to work with the city, which was definitely a huge flaw there. And also, they never won the local crowd, which is a thing that you really need to do in the tourism area. You look at Disney, you look at Universal. Universal definitely caters to the locals with their buy an annual pass during Mardi Gras and you get 3 months free. Disney has the Visit from Florida tickets, where during the slow season they give you a really good deal on buying tickets and things like that. You never had that at the at Myrtle Beach, and so my professor was saying he would go out to dinner on a Friday night, pretending to be a tourist, and he would ask waitresses about like, "What do you think of Hard Rock Park? Should we go there tomorrow?" And like, no, that place is a ripoff. And so the town never supported the place, and so you never got any of the 100,000 locals that live in that town. And instead it was, the 27,000 locals never wanted to go there. And so that failed as well. Plus they never actually really finished paying off the park either. Like I know Premier never ended up getting paid for that roller coaster that we just talked about, that maximum RPM. So there was a lot of things going on that Hard Rock Park definitely didn't do well. One thing that's really crazy is their employees that worked there, that like summer job, like housing, had beachfront condos that they could see the goddamn beach from. Like, tell me that didn't cost Hard Rock Park too much money.
Definitely. Yeah. It's one of those things. I think what's fascinating about Hard Rock Park, and you were addressing it early, Kenny, is that this place was only open for a time period of a few months, and then it was just gone. And even the Freestyle Park, what would really drive you into checking out Hard Rock Park is all the licensed properties like the Led Zeppelin roller coaster. And to have that gone in how many months? Did you mention?
Well, it opened I think June of 2008, maybe May. But then it closed after Labor Day because of its financial problems, and then they attempted to reopen it under different ownership for 2009 and didn't make it. So it only operated not even 2 full seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Which is crazy. I can't name, you guys probably know better than I do because you are the experts as far as this is concerned. Can you name another, let's shoot straight here, can you name another flop of this level in the theme park industry, at least in the United States?
No.
Oh, God, no. But it is interesting. We saw 2 parks close that same year as Freestyle Music Park. The Silver Dollar City sister park, Celebration City, also died that year. So the recession did kill a couple of parks, but I've never seen anything this magnitude with, I mean, you're talking, you had a $25 million B&M roller coaster, and you built from the big manufacturers. It wasn't like you went to used rides for you and like bought some sale
Bob's
rides.
Warehouse as fulfilled by Amazon.
Yeah, you didn't do that. They built brand new custom rides, and
no, they had B&M, they had Premier, they had Vekoma was in there. I mean, $400 million for a park from the ground up is no small feat at all to just colossally fail like this.
Let me ask you guys this, because of the location with Myrtle Beach, do you think this would have better... Do you think they might have had better luck driving in traffic if this would have been country music focused? Because obviously they had a big country section in the park, but do you think if they maybe would have changed things up that it would have driven any additional traffic? Or
I don't think so. I genuinely think that it was the market and some poor planning. I mean, not even that it was poor planning, just maybe mismanaged planning. Which I guess, that's poor planning considering it failed. But I just, the idea, the concept, it would have, the rock theme to it, I don't think that was the problem. It wasn't the type of music. It was just all the things Drew just spoke about. And just maybe had it been in a different market, I could totally see, like, I never looked at this park and thought, well, I can see why that failed. Like, it's always shit under the surface.
I honestly would have looked at building it closer to Cleveland, where they're the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
See, I was
Yeah,
gonna say put it
but
near Nashville or Memphis, very music focused
You know,
locations.
Cleveland, you're dealing with Cedar Point. You got to compete with, and
it's really funny that you mentioned these two cities because Kenny's going to know this guy. We have this listener who loves the In the Loop podcast. His name's Justin Ann, and he kept sending us emails about how Hard Rock Park failed because it was in the wrong location, and he said it should either go in Cleveland or Nashville, and because it Music City and the music capital and all of that kind of thing, and I'd say he's probably right on that one.
Well, with Nashville at this point, Opryland would have been closed down, which would have been,
Yeah.
I guess, if that was going to be the quote unquote competitor, even though they're totally different attractions. I mean, they would have had a free market because there's nothing like that in that area. I guess except Dollywood would be the closest.
But that's like 4+ hours away, which
Yeah.
um,
I could see Cleveland working, Adam, just for the sake of the Rock Hall of Fame. I guess the only thing that I would be hesitant with that is if you look back at the history of Geauga Lake, which is another park that we could actually do a look back at some point. Their big problem was strictly competing with Cedar Point, and eventually Cedar Point bought that out and just shut it down because that's a juggernaut when it comes to the roller coaster game. So maybe if you put a Hard Rock Park to sort of feed into the Cleveland market, maybe on the eastern side of Cleveland, to where maybe you're feeding into Pennsylvania a bit. You've got the Pittsburgh market, I guess.
I'd almost move it more Midwest, honestly. I use Cleveland as an example just because they have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't really know the theme park history of Cleveland specifically. I could definitely see Nashville, although I would have given it a little bit more, not totally. It doesn't need to even be 50%, but I would have given it a little bit more of a country music theme if they were going to go with something like Nashville. But I did want to mention earlier something that you had said, Kenny, like when you were talking about like Six Flags or somebody like that come in. I wonder if they don't look at things like Six Flags New Orleans and as a reason not to invest in possibly a failing property.
That's very, very possible because Six Flags was immensely affected by the 2008 economic downturn. Like Six Flags essentially went into bankruptcy and had to sort of redo their entire business model to become what they are now, which is despite what you think about them as a visitor to the parks, like they've actually done very well for themselves financially by going through that same failing period and learning from things like Six Flags New Orleans. They kind of overextended themselves in the 90s, buying up too many parks. Kentucky Kingdom was another one. Drew, did they own Elitch Gardens at one point? Was that a Six Flags property out in Denver?
yeah, Six Flags owned that property.
What's the one in New York?
Darien Lake.
Darien Lake. Like these are all parks that, yeah, they probably did learn from, and so they've been a little more gun shy when it comes to going and buying up something like a Hard Rock Park. But I guess my point with that was it was a fully blown, the infrastructure was there, everything was in place, yet when it failed, nobody else jumped to, Cedar Fair's done nothing but grow since then. They could have come in and bought that up, but they decided not to. I just think maybe they did the marketing research and realized, nope, Myrtle Beach isn't the place to do this.
Do you think that's an indicator of just the Hard Rock brand as a whole, that it just not have the cultural appeal that it did even 20 years ago?
Well, I don't think Cedar Fair would have ever kept the Hard Rock brand because Cedar Fair was not into the IPs. When they bought the Kings Island parks, they just ripped all of the Paramount branding off of everything.
Right. But yeah, and that's a good point. They could have bought into Freestyle Park and just kind of gave it their own name, but even they just didn't see it as a suitable market to try and tackle this park.
I think I think you would both mention the market and the economic downturn of 2008. I think that's very likely. There's a lot of factors that go into something like this failing, but that's probably the biggest factor in why it couldn't turn around. It's unfortunately, I mean, there is some estimation for things like that where, like, generally speaking, there's an 8 to 10 year turnaround for economic downturns, like roughly every 8 years or something like that. Like there's a little bit of a not depression, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but in general, you can't plan for exactly how badly things are going to go. So it's probably just a list of factors, and that might be the biggest one, and that also might be the biggest reason why another company wouldn't be willing to take the risk of investing in it, especially considering it would have already been in the hole pretty badly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was also interesting to hear John Binkowski talk about the fact that seeing how they kind of brought this, they didn't have the big parent company backing this. They didn't have a Comcast or a Disney, or on a smaller level a Six Flags or a Cedar Fair. So they kind of pulled all the financing for this together themselves. And because of that, when it started to take the economic downturn out of the equation, there's always going to be a period of growing pains with something like this. And when you've got a parent company to kind of fall back on as a safety net, which they didn't have, you can go and request more money to get you through that tough second, third, fourth year. And then at a certain point, a lot of these parks will start to grow as they've established themselves. But since this was all financed to begin with, and that's why I said earlier it was all kind of leveraged with the financing through banks and other financial backers, they didn't have the opportunity to go and say, hey, we need some more money to get through this tough period. Instead, they had people that they already owed millions upon millions of dollars to, and they damn sure weren't going to go give them more, a couple more $1 million to get through this tough, time period. So add in now 2008, the economy crashes. I mean, when you're already in a entirely financed situation and you have no backing already, it's just a recipe for disaster. So
it's actually kind of funny though. 2008 was one of Knobel's best seasons ever because nobody could afford to go to the Walt Disney World or anything like that. So they went to their local regional park, and that was their family's vacation that year.
Yeah.
So it's kind of surprises me that the recession actually kind of fucked this park over. And I feel like if they were priced maybe like $20 cheaper, they might have actually succeeded better.
Yeah. That's a fair point, because a lot of the smaller family-owned regional parks did definitely thrive from that time period. But this
how did Knott's Berry Farm do around that time period, if you know?
Well, that was an interesting time period for them, because isn't that when Cedar Fair was buying them from who owned them previously? Well, it was just Knott's, wasn't it? All the way up until the mid-2000s? I don't recall exactly. But Knott's Berry Farm in the early 2000s went through a bit of a rough patch themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interestingly, this has nothing to do with anything except for I moved to Orlando for the second time in like the economic downturn was towards the end of 2008, going into 2009. That's when I moved to Orlando and could not find a job to save my life. And I probably wouldn't be on the show today if it weren't for the fact that I ended up having to move home again with my tail between my legs.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But these seasonal gates, I think part of the thing is, what did they call it? Giving away the gate, where you're paying essentially $35 for admission with the Coke promotion or whatever, and then you've got to pay for parking and then food, souvenirs, from the line passes, and all that stuff. Do you think they just outpriced themselves in comparison?
That's a very real possibility, just because they had so much money that they had to make back to get out of the hole that they were in. Like Drew mentioned, their gate price in 2008 was right around $70. It was 60 something dollars. And they attempted to correct that in the second year of operation, when they dropped the branding of Hard Rock and all that, and they reopened as Freestyle. Ticket prices went down to around $40, but I think at that point the damage had been done. They had already soured the opinions of the locals. If you check out, read a little bit more about it on like the Wikipedia page, 2009, a lot of the companies that had financed it originally were starting to file lawsuits because they weren't seeing their money back. So they were already in a hole and now looking to go further in a hole because now the lawsuits were piling up and so on and so forth. So they
Oh, I know.
possibly,
I mentioned it earlier, but like Premiere was suing about the fact that Premiere never saw a dime for their fucking roller coaster that was like state of the art at the time, and then the owners of Freestyle sold it to the Vietnamese park that bought it, and like still never paid Premiere for it.
So yeah, Hunter, to answer your question, I think the gate price was the least of their problems. They probably very quickly realized that. What?
Have
Okay.
you guys ever looked at the?
Sorry about that.
Did you ever look
More,
at the like what replaced the Hard Rock Park attractions once Freestyle opened up, like the Monstars of Rock attraction? It's all cardboard cutouts. It's fantastic. You'll love it. Except it's awful.
Oh boy. No, I don't know much about that.
No, I never made it to the park either way. Ironically enough, my co-host for the In the Loop podcast has actually been to Hard Rock Park. So if you guys want, he can like give you 2 minutes of what he thought of that place. So he went to Freestyle Music Park. You want to hear what it was like?
Go for it.
Oh shit!
Hey, Skinny.
Another special guest. Totally
Hey.
unplanned.
I can't hear without the headphones. And these have been in your ears. That's so gross. Oh, that's disgusting.
For everybody listening, our guest Drew has just passed the mic over to Legend, another co-host of the In the Loop podcast. What's up?
As Drew has nothing to do, I guess, on his Sunday, where he's recording this podcast and then immediately recording our podcast.
And I also record lines for the Ride This One podcast earlier today.
Oh boy!
Wow, you are a busy gentleman. Well, hi, Grinning host.
Legend,
Hey.
So
Nice to have you.
the Legend.
Yes.
You were able to visit Hard Rock Park.
I was actually in its second year when it was under different ownership, and it was then Freestyle Music Park at the time. So you had some different themes on the rides and some different soundtracks on the rides, but it was pretty much the same rides. The one thing they did weird about the awesome Knights in White Satin ride and replaced it with one of the worst dark rides I've ever seen. So they took
There we
out
are.
all the scenery and they essentially just put in cardboard flats of like knockoff monsters,
Yes.
and it was the worst. As for the park itself, it was a nice little park. None of the rides were really stand out, but I really liked they had a B&M, which is great. It was when I went there, it was themed to the Time Machine, and it had different soundtracks on it. So it would be different eras of music every time you would ride. So one time you would ride, it'd be 90s music. One time you ride, it'd be 70s music, and it would be like a mix of different songs. So it made for a really cool, repeatable ride.
Sure.
One thing
pretty cool.
but you could definitely tell why they went out of business. I was there on a Saturday, and there was probably a good 200 people in the park, and I think it was like $20 to get in. Like you knew when you were there, like this is not going to be here long.
Wow.
I didn't actually even know that there was a second phase of it where it had a different name.
Yeah, I think it was even less popular.
I'm pretty sure that was just when they were in oh shit mode. We
I've-
still
I've-
want to try to make a go of this, but can't fucking afford what we did originally.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they sold to somebody else after they sort of went under or something like that, but it was somebody else stepped up and they also lost big time.
All right. I mean, when you were there, like, was the theming around the? I mean, I guess it's tough to say because you weren't there the original year. I've heard like amazing things about the overarching theme of it originally, the first year that it opened.
I mean, it was definitely a cool place. It was definitely more themed than your average Six Flags or Cedar Fair park. Not to the level of a Universal or a Disney or something like that, but maybe on the scale of like badder parts of a Busch Gardens. Like not some
Badder
not
parts.
some of the
I like that.
yeah like Egypt at Busch Gardens is really really well themed here in Tampa. Other sections are not so much. The not so much would be in line with like Hard Rock Park.
Something like Sheikra area.
Yes, exactly. The park was cool. It definitely it had some interesting touches. Like there was a mural above the urinal in the men's room where painted ladies were just sort of looking at your junk. They were either laughing or taking pictures. They definitely had some cool stuff at this park.
I brought it up when we first started recording, but the the iconic sign of the free air guitars by the entrance always got a good chuckle out of me.
It was just a stand with no guitar. I love
Yeah,
it.
it was just a guitar stand.
And they
Right.
definitely they had a lot of stuff like that around the park. That kind of thing that if you did like, if you're fans of Islands of Adventure and stuff like that, and the little details in parks, it definitely was a park that had those.
Yeah, I don't know. It sucks. It seems like they did most of the things right as far as what a theme park should be. They just kind of failed behind the scenes, is what it really comes
Marketing.
down to.
I know you guys probably talked about this. Marketing was the big thing. They didn't market the place, and they had a wrong price point and all sorts of stuff.
So, Hunter, you kind of were the one that brought this up originally and wanted to know more about this. Did you have any other questions or things that
No,
intrigued you about?
I think we really just about covered it.
Cool. Yeah, super interesting story. And like I said before, I would strongly advise not to plug them again, but I'm going to because it was such a good episode, episode 243 of the Season Pass podcast, to go back and listen to them talk about the whole creative process of despite the massive failure that this park was, it's still really cool to listen to the way that they went about tackling these projects and building these rides and working with not only the ride designers but the artists, the musical artists that were behind this as well. So just a really, really fascinating story to listen to.
Definitely.
And it was a solid park. It got good reviews. I just think it was in the wrong place with the wrong marketing. Like, I think if that would have been maybe in Orlando or Las Vegas, I think it could have worked.
Oh,
Didn't even
Vegas.
think about
oh,
Vegas.
shit. I didn't think about that.
No,
yeah.
we did not think about Vegas.
I wouldn't have put it in Orlando. Too much competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Vegas
there's also
for
a lot
sure.
of tourist dollars here.
True. Something Myrtle Beach could not support. Orlando
There's a lot
maybe
of poor
could.
people in Myrtle Beach. There's a lot of people, but a lot of poor people.
Yes.
On a future episode, actually, I'm going to do a little more research, and I want to bring up the Disney's America park that they were looking at building at one point, because there's a lot to examine about the idea of putting a theme park somewhere other than a coast.
There's a lot to break down there.
Yeah.
All right, then. Well, that's going to wrap up another episode of Grinning Host.